Well, welcome to the blockchain Imaginarium. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We're going to go over a little bit about the blockchain, a little bit about myself, some IoT, AI, if you're familiar with it. If you're not, that's okay. Some imagine this, amazing convergence of all three technologies, or one or with both, or maybe just AI with blockchain, IoT with blockchain. Some use cases, and then opening this up since this is the Imaginarium for some Q&A. So who am I? Sorry, I put a lot on here. I will only go through a few. My name is Angeleen Wilson. I am a developer. I work at Turner Broadcasting over here in our home state in the city of Atlanta. I mainly build data visual applications. I started the Georgia Blockchain Coalition last year to help bridge the gaps between community, businesses, small businesses, and what the biggest thing I think we need now is education. I help host the Atlanta Blockchain Week, which is coming up in September. And I have a lovely lady over here that's also part of my team for Women of Blockchain Atlanta. We are partnered with Women Who Code, who I'm also involved with. I have a fun podcast called CryptoRitas, because I thought what's more fun than talking about blockchain and having some drinks. I'm helping with a movie prediction model called PickFlix using Ethereum tokens, if you're familiar with Ethereum, and helping with school systems on how we can build some less disparity through systems using the technology. So moving on to what the blockchain is. Everybody heard of blockchain? Bitcoin. Well, if you're a Bitcoin investor, sorry, this is not what we're going to talk about, but it is very important to touch a little bit on it. And what blockchain technology has been able to do is to create a digital gold, they call it, of Bitcoin, using it as the first cryptocurrency. I like to call it cyber currency because we're using it through our cyberspace as a digital asset that is created out of blockchain. So you can have blockchain without cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin, but you can't have Bitcoin without blockchain because that's what it's built off of. And what's important about Bitcoin is not what it's doing as a value of currency, it's how it works. Blockchain is more importantly not just a transaction of money, it's a transaction of value and exchanging information in different ways. So a little bit more about blockchain. Think about it as a distributed database. That's exactly what it is. It's creating new rows, validating those new rows through pre-termed and conditioned of rules. They call it smart contracts, which I would love to dive in more to, but I got 45 minutes. But all it goes down to is distributing, listening, and broadcasting data through our networks of computers that are now serving as servers, as opposed to the central authority of servers, say, for example, what PayPal uses now. Anybody had problems with Equifax, Home Depot, maybe Target with any of those hacks, unfortunately, the past 5 years? That was because there's a central server controlling that information and who it's executed to, and maybe some of the parameters around the security wasn't as strong. But just going back to what blockchain really is important to understand, it's a distributed database. Some of the important attributes about blockchain, if you're not familiar with it, open source, just meaning that going back to the security, being able to see how they built it, maybe some of the security protocols that they have put in or haven't, because again, blockchain is not perfect, just like any technology, and it's important to do your research. Permanent, tamper-proof, you probably heard of the word immutable, which just, in other words, is unalterable. Again, going back to what blockchain is, it's a distributed database recording history with unique attributes. And that goes to also your ownership of the data. You have more control. You know who's using it because of the security behind it. And you know how it's being communicated through the peer-to-peer storage in real time. Autosync, like every type of technology, is not perfect, but it does in regards to finalizing, receiving, and sending information. Another important attribute about blockchain is the finality of receiving information. For example, if you're going through your bank and you see it's still pending, with blockchain, again, from a Bitcoin standpoint, the finality is automatically there once it secures and confirms that that block was created through the blockchain, that you're receiving that information, and what you've sent has been followed through the finality of that person receiving it. We've heard of IoT. A lot of people, it's just the easiest way to, I don't know if you're familiar with Pulp Fiction. It's fun, classic, but a lot of people just say IoT. Obviously, it's the best way to say Internet of Things, whether it's through your phones, through your Fitbit, utilizing fashion wear has gotten very popular with it, or maybe even, your smart refrigerator. Now they're creating ways to be able to sync with your car, with your calendar and your activity for your entire family, which I'll get to. Key attributes on what blockchain and IoT can bring together is building that trust, going back to what blockchain offers in security, but being able to reduce the risk of people to be able to tamper, because blockchain, again, immutable, aka unalterable. You cannot change that information. So being able to utilize the technology of Internet of Things, which I'll go in more detail about, and building that trust using blockchain to record the data, how the Internet of Things is able to retrieve the data. Reducing the costs, again, going back to what PayPal gives you as those lovely fees when you make transactions, right? It's because a lot of it's the operational costs, the overhead of being able to store that data within their server. Not to say there's not money involved in blockchain and cryptocurrencies, for example, but it's less in regards to how we're storing and serving information, so you're not gonna have to spend as much. Accelerating transaction, going back to that finality. Within almost 10 minutes, varies. The strength of blockchain is getting there on scalability. It's gotten better in regards to finalizing your transaction, but it's not having to wait for that pending that you have to do for business days with banks. Just giving you a little bit of visual, again, going back to Internet of Things, you have some wearables, you got your smartphone, maybe your voice assistants. Sometimes I wish I had one for my son. Your hearables, if you're my mom, your lighting and climate. If you don't, there's a company here actually in Atlanta called Aquagenuity. I'm gonna say this incorrectly, Aquagenuity. One of my friend's doll has created it to give you, instead of weather, it gives how your water's doing within the geolocation that you're at on the health of it, with all this amazing data through IoT to be able to track that for you. It's about to come out this summer. Those are just a few things as you're probably already familiar with IoT. AI. Some people question of what really is AI, what's not, but just to give you a little bit of a history, from the 1950s to the 1970s, those neural networks, if you're familiar with the technology, of just about thinking through algorithms. 1980s, if you're old enough, the 2010s, machine learning, which became popular, and now present day, learning by example through deep learning, that's another term for it, and breaking through more ways of utilizing deep learning of the technology, which is just repetitive of the data, trying to discover what that data is doing, and trying to, again, learn by example of that data. The collective. The reason why I want to put these all in perspective is just going back to what the term of the focus is data. Blockchain, a distributed database. AI is algorithms trying to learn what this data is doing once it's stored. And IoT is collecting that data through the enabled or embedded devices that we use. And I put Toy Story because it's about to come out. All right, so imagine this. Healthcare and medicine. Anybody in the healthcare and medicine industry are familiar with it? Yeah, you are, Danny. So think about this. AI is probabilistic. It's finding suggestions for you, or going, again, learning through maybe from a human example of what this data is doing and trying to come up with something through the changing of the behavior of this data. Whereas blockchain, I don't want to say it's consistent from the development and the new releases of what blockchain can do. However, the attributes and the cool things, the cool shit about it, is it's deterministic in how we build it. It's permanent, untamperable, and the algorithms record the reality, because you can't change it, where AI, it's guessing. But it sort of works where one variable will consistently try to learn, where blockchain can record it. So again, going back to healthcare, we all have our health records. We've all been in situations where somebody or a doctor's office is asking us for information, like, how many times do I have to write this down? So there are existing platforms out there trying to build where you can track your medical billing. You can be de-identified, which means that you want to be identified, but without your public information being out there. And that's very important because our data is just out there. We give it so much just by signing up for an account. For example, Twilio, nothing against them, but we are giving our information in different ways that we don't realize that could be utilized. Safe way, but not for all, right? Our medical data is very important to us. It gives us a history of who we are and maybe some things that could maybe be better, and that's where AI could come in with this. With blockchain and AI, I believe it could come up with a safe and transparent way to decentralize the way we communicate. Of course, there's barriers. I want to say barriers, but there's ways we got to work with the HIPAA laws. But just to create a better way to record, analyze, and secure this information so that experts can give you the best information. But with AI, it can make some best suggestions while you're maybe going through a process with your doctors, or maybe trying to work out and your Fitbit is giving you some information that could be connected to another database to tell you how you're doing. So again, going back to this, imagine this. Imagine your healthcare transactions in blockchain using IoT to enable your health activity devices to collecting data that can be stored on the blockchain. So where does that go? Your physician receives it because maybe your child has a vaccination. The details are given to the doctor, and of course it's stored in their system. But how do we make that much better to where we're not necessarily transparent in those details, because again, we want to be private, but we're able to maybe get suggestions on where we're going to be at through maybe the progress for our child, or for ourselves as maybe we're going through a health change, or make a better health change for ourselves. And that's where AI can bring those capabilities. Through being able to make suggested recommendations based off learning through this data from the previous activity that you have made as a patient. The next thing I thought it was important because we all eat. We all have food, right? We all like food, I hope so. We just ate some food. So imagine this. Imagine having a better way to communicate as a consumer on where your food came from, what it's made of, and from a safety standpoint of the logistical distribution of the age of it. Unfortunately, there are other parts of this world that do not have some of the things that we have as advantages of the age of our food. There's a lot of, unfortunately, rice contaminations just because it wasn't clean. And how do we track that? We can easily do that with RFID technology, again, Internet of Things, to be able to track from creation, distribution, and then allocation into our stores. A lot safer through the involvement of the parties of AI, and then IoT. And this is just a little examples of where in consideration of where we maybe grow our food, who's involved in it, and then where we're receiving it as individual users. So imagine production, storage, and food processing being able to be more transparent, because we're, again, want to have more responsibility of the quality checking of this information because we are consuming it, our children are consuming it. You may be taking care of a parent and you don't have a dietitian on hand, but you got to make sure you're giving them the right resources and how that's preserved through the food that's being created, and if it's good for them through hopefully not any type of contamination. And this again goes back to imagining how sensors can be utilized and managed through video as well. We don't think about that, but not trying to say dateline here, but there is a lot of importance of how maybe, unfortunately, there are some people, I think through Bali recently, unfortunately, they don't know what happened. They think it's food consumption. Maybe if there was some type of sensor or video of where they were at that time of maybe their last meal, I don't know. There's all kinds of ways of utilizing technology to build a better way to connect technology together. Oh, I wanted to ask this, who has pets? Okay, well that's important too. You know, we take sort of that for granted too. We just pick up, I have a cat, I just get the cat food. My cat got sick. I'm like, oh goodness, what was it? Was it the bag of food? Was it maybe the different food? Was it the time? I don't know, but it all came back to, okay, maybe this was a bad bag of food, took her to the vet. They couldn't really explain to me. So again, it's just going back to our loved ones being involved and how we're able to utilize existing technology to help make it better. Being able to control knowing what we eat, the conditions of it, and where it comes from using blockchain, the sensor connections through IoT, and possibly through AI, and we're getting our suggestive of learning what's going on in the databases where we're getting through the retailers. Connected cars. Everybody heard of those autonomous driving vehicles were made in the next 10, 20 years, probably have to be acquainted with or utilize. That's actually, to me, really cool shit because we really can control, from a consumer standpoint, where we take that. Ford, for example, I think was last year, decided not to make any more sedans. That may not seem important to you. However, they're putting all their money into autonomous, creating all these patents to get approved for autonomous driving. So, okay. And Jennifer, you'd appreciate this. The reason why I know that is my friend took her MBA at UGA to tell me about that within her dissertation. So some cool shit, but we need to know that because we're consumers of it and we can help influence how that happens for us. I don't want to drive, however, it does. How does that cost for us? What does that mean for us to understand the technology behind it? And that's where the cool shit about blockchain is, because you don't want to have something driving you. It gets tampered with, so we need that safeguard. We need to be able to have something that can either track what's going on in a hack or be able to utilize the data to find from distribution of whether we got in a vehicle and it just happened and we never used that vehicle before, where it went, where it came from, or just being able from a behavior sense of being able to use that IoT and being able to trigger what the problem is or what it's doing in regards to where we want to go with our daily activity in that vehicle that's driving us, instead of us driving it itself. The reason why I want to differentiate this between on blockchain and off blockchain is because it makes a little bit of difference on how to understand the technology with cars. On blockchain just means those smart contracts, those pre-designed terms and conditions that you agree to, using chain code smart contracts where those payments are agreed upon, helps to probably leverage those vehicles that we will be buying, exchanging, and securing and confirming through where we purchase them. And that's just even now. There are several companies, which I'll go through, for use cases that are already doing that and starting to do that. They're very recognizable in the industry. The reason why I like this picture is just the other day, if you're familiar with blockchain games, $100,000 of US dollars in Ethereum was bought to buy a virtual F1 through a Delta time game through blockchain. It's just a digital asset to be recognized on the blockchain, and money is being put out there. So I thought it was a cool picture of that vehicle that someone decided to buy online. Can't drive it, but they thought it was valuable enough to put money on it. Not to say you need to do that. Off blockchain communication, still very important to understand the difference, is just understanding where the vehicle, the hardware, the vehicle, the infrastructure, and the service providers that where it's communicated through, say for example, those sensors through IoT. Again, going through acknowledging what autonomous vehicles do and sending messages through IoT. Maybe you need to know where a charging station is, where the next parking space is. These are capabilities that IoT is able to do, and using blockchain to be able to track your activity may at some point help you, or help maybe, unfortunately, the ones that we buy these from, help pinpoint who would utilize these type of vehicles better. Going back to what you just said, cool shit. Tesla is looking into this from an electrical vehicle standpoint. There are some platforms, OpenBazaar, where they're trying to utilize the network to create charging stations. And when you buy that, you're using smart contracts to do that. So some use cases to go to let you know of who's in the blockchain right now, and possibly obviously in IoT and AI, is Toyota as of 2017. They confirmed that they were using IoT sensors in cars to store information of what the consumer was doing through these vehicles. Honda and GM, BMW, and Volkswagen are also others using blockchain as an initiative to test out whether the transactions from maybe a reward-based system. I don't know about you, but I know a few people got rewarded or got less on their insurance because they had a plug-in while they were driving for like a 3-month period. Okay, and that's a few of these companies that may not have put on here. There are others that are looking into that from an insurance standpoint on your activity. Some other use cases, especially with blockchain and IoT, is the chain. If you like wine, they are using blockchain to be able to track from the growth of those grapes through the creation of the wine, from distribution all the way to when you can buy it through a retailer. And the authenticity that these designer bags that we ladies like to buy are authentic and real through RFID, through this company called VeChain. Another example, not going to go through all of these, again, going back to food, is the food supply. Through Ambrosis is creating an ecosystem where you can find and track the history of products recorded for commercial. Walmart is also doing the same thing. If you're, for example, if you have a small farm, or if you've got crops and you're trying to sell them from a farmer's market perspective, and you have a relationship with Walmart, I think as of last year, beginning of 2019, unless you were able to enable your systems with theirs using blockchain, you had to remove your relationship from them until you were able to do so. So they are obviously very heavily involved in how blockchain is utilized to track the distribution of their food and other retail items. So I wanted to leave this up because this is the Imaginarium. Gave you some examples of how all three technologies are used, and maybe some ideas you had, maybe after this, some of the examples I gave you, or something you already had in mind, or any questions. Brandon, I know you have one. Okay. So a few I wanted to put on here, I just wasn't sure because of time, and I wanted to make sure I kept the 45 minutes at 45 minutes. There are things, for example, with children, going back to, how we have pets and how we have our youngest that we're taking care of. There are several platforms within the school systems that are now utilizing blockchain to be able to track a children's progress all the way up into college and then into employment. Now, this may not go necessarily to the AI part of it or to the IoT, but they are looking at AI to help make recommendations through this data that it's being tracked on the blockchain for these children all the way up to their young adulthood, to help get them into a place to feel familiar, not just with the technology, but how they can be successful in something they may like based off their progress. Well, it was more like high school into post.
Well, like, if you get a job in some places, you take a skills test, and they'll place you based on what you know and what you don't know and all that stuff.
And that's another thing too that they mentioned is using, again, not just transcripts, but maybe utilizing these tests as data, again, because that's what blockchain is, to help learn how these students are learning and how they can best place them into different vocations. I could probably go on for another examples if you'd like me to. I just didn't add them on here. Again, going back to alcohol distribution, people don't realize the industry is huge. VeChain is obviously cannibalized on the technology of blockchain to be able to track wine. But there is, my sister had dated a gentleman in Atlanta, and it was a luxury tequila company. And people don't realize how small where they grow agave, and it's very competitive. And so I was just having some curious thoughts with them, and they are looking into tracking agave, not just for alcohol, but also from a tequiliana, but also the nectar of it, to be able to track it for not just consumership, but really putting authenticity on what people are buying, because luxury tequila is not $10, it's like $50 to $60, and authenticating that information. Any questions?
To think about the comparison, the slide you had with the AI and the blockchain side by side, are you aware of any projects that have AI that record their findings with blockchain?
Other than most likely with the connected vehicles, that's why I wanted to make sure we discussed that. Right now, in success, that's where the focus, based on my learning, is. But Walmart is utilizing what people are purchasing through this blockchain technology that now they are making their local vendors use to, I don't want to say predict how people or what people are shopping, but their behavior. Okay.
immutable fashion.
Okay.
Because like when they talk to each other and they go into their own language, it kind of freaks me out.
Okay. Well, and think about it. AI is probabilistic. You know, it's ever changing based off, because we're not predictable. But companies such as Amazon are trying to do that. You know, where I work right now, we're trying to forecast how people's viewership behavior is. And, you know, look at Netflix, for example. So thinking about blockchain being recording that information, and then AI being able to just give sort of the ebb and flow of how people's behavior. And going back to the vehicle, I think it was Hyundai. Hyundai is created since 2018, if you're familiar with the CES event. It's a IPC, I'm gonna say that correctly. They call it the cockpit for your vehicle, almost like a remote to trigger your smart home with your smart car and sync up all your information from your calendar to your kid's schedule. Well, thanks for coming. If you don't have any more questions, thank you.